Hey, this is Jason Bradley from the Community Solutions Podcast. And before we start today's podcast, I just want to take a moment and talk to you because we are neck deep in election season and people are getting their campaigns into full swing. And we wouldn't have it any other way than having you out there in the community meeting your neighbors and growing Team 20K. You know what, though? Some of you out there I know could use a little extra bump, whether that's some strategy, whether that's learning how to read a comprehensive annual financial report, whether that is understanding your city's comprehensive plan. We're here for you. So get a hold of us, and we would love to sit down for a consulting session with you. Nobody else in Minnesota does this at the local level. All you got to do is reach out to us at commsolutionsmn@gmail.com. That is commsolutionsmn@gmail.com, and we will sure make your campaign competitive. All right, enough of my yapping, and back to the show. I don't want to pacify you. I don't want to drag you down. But I'm feeling like a prisoner, like a stranger in a no-name town. I see all the angry faces, afraid that could be you and me. Talking about what might have been, I'm thinking about what I used to be. There's no easy way out. There's no shortcut home. There's no easy way out. Giving in can't be wrong. This is the Community Solutions Podcast. Jason Bradley, Andrew Richter, back for another fantastic episode. You're speechless.
I'm speechless because I'm trying to think of this song. It sounds like it's from a Rocky movie.
Yes. Yes, it is.
We'll see who sang all those. Survivor was one.
No. This was a one-hit wonder guy.
Rocky 4 when he's driving the car.
That's it.
But I don't know the name.
No Easy Way Out.
Right, I know, but who's the band?
Just a guy, Robert Tepper.
Robert Tepper.
I don't know. You never would have guessed that. But I chose something from Rocky 4 today, one of my favorite songs out of a Rocky film, because when we get into the local lowdown, you're going to find out why.
I agree, but every time I think of a Rocky movie, I just think of all the great Rocky quotes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I know he kind of got smarter as the...
He did. I mean, and really... The first Rocky movie is one of my favorite movies of all time. But, there's just something about, the vulnerability of it and him losing at the end that
there's something about the story that
it's really, really good.
Captivating on a low-budget film. I mean, people who don't know that Sylvester Stallone wrote the movie.
Right.
And wouldn't sell it because Hollywood wanted to buy it, but they wanted to cast Burt Reynolds or Jimmy Caan or somebody as Rocky. And
you've seen Burt Reynolds
as but
Rocky.
Robert Redford, they were all up for that role, and Stallone insisted on playing the part, and that's why they never put a lot of money into it, and because he was an unknown actor.
Which I think is part of the charm of that movie, by the way.
Who else could have played him?
Really. But, you get to Rocky 4, and it's a little campy. You go back and watch it now. I mean, you understand it, and back then when you're watching it, it's like, oh, those Soviets are going to pay. I love it, But now to watch it, it's a little campy. But that song, that montage is one of my favorite moments out of a Rocky film. Absolutely.
Yo, Paulie, it's cold outside. I mean, come on, you just can't beat the lines in the movies. I mean,
I know.
There's something else. I'll tell you what. It's funny. I'm not usually a fan of sequels. Now every good movie has a sequel. It seems like.
It seems like it.
But then that was very unusual. And I'm usually, the first Jaws was always my favorite, and the first whatever seemed Chris Karate Kid was my favorite.
I liked number 1, number 2 I like a little bit, but
yeah.
Also Star Wars I like. Empire Strikes Back is probably my favorite of the first 3.
Yeah, I can understand that too. But usually I don't like sequels. With the Rocky ones, I I can watch any of them except the fifth.
Oh,
the
yeah.
fifth was hideous.
Oh, that's terrible.
But the one he made in like 2007, I thought was really good.
It was.
I was shocked at how good it was,
as well as the Creed movie.
Yeah, I have not seen that.
Very good.
So that's your Apollo son.
Yeah. And Creed.
Yo,
Creed
okay.
2 is coming out. He's going to fight Drago's son. It's going to be amazing.
Awesome.
So that just ties it ties it all back together. Robert Tepper, No Easy Way Out. Maybe it will come back in that film.
I hope so.
I hope so. Yeah. So speaking of it, so we're gonna get a little bit of little boxing, little pugilism in here, and which we don't normally get to do on this podcast. This is going to be fun. We're going to travel in our minds here all the way up to Thief River Falls, Minnesota.
It's a little ways, a little drive.
Yeah, a little bit of a drive. A little bit of a drive. What is it from here? About 4 hours?
Probably. Yeah, probably more than that. I mean, you're talking way up there in the Northwest. Probably more like 5 or 6.
Absolutely. Well, I don't think it's that far.
I don't think there's a straight shot to it, though.
No. You got to either go up to Brainerd to go over.
It's not like taking 35 to Duluth or 94 to Moorhead.
Yeah, or not Brainerd, sorry, Bemidji. It's like going up to Bemidji and you go west from there, or you can go up like towards Crookston and go over from there. So, yeah.
It's a drive, let's put it that way.
It is a drive. But anyways, in Thief River Falls, I just love the headlines. I want to read the headlines first, and then we can get into the story here on the Local Lowdown. Splash pad debate sparks physical fight in Thief River Falls Council. Fight allegedly breaks
they're
out.
Passionate up there about that splash pad that can probably be open 2 months out of the year.
That's true. Fight allegedly breaks out at Northern Minnesota Council meeting.
I love it, allegedly.
Yes, allegedly. It's on
either
video.
it did
the
or it
meetings
didn't.
are on video, I would assume.
Well, now, was this a meeting, or was this a council meeting?
Yeah. Well, we'll get into this. I want to read 2 more. Thief River Falls City Council meeting comes to fisticuffs over a splash pad.
That title alone ought to be embarrassing.
Yeah, but this is the best out of all of them. Some jerk city councilmen break out in a fight in Northwest Minnesota meeting.
Don't hold back your feelings there.
Yeah, that sounds like something that you would have written about Crystal back in 2010.
Yeah, possibly.
Okay, so that one. So what happened is that there was a city council meeting in Thief River Falls. So yes, a city council meeting where allegedly there's an investigation underway to determine if a city council member really did swing a chair at another member during an apparently heated discussion about a splash pad project. This is from NPR News, which we don't quote very often.
We definitely don't.
But they reported on it. Came out of the Grand Forks Herald, which is, I guess, their big newspaper up in that area. I don't know what there is to investigate. I mean, unless nobody goes to their city council meetings.
Well, it said at Tuesday's committee meeting. Is that not a council meeting? Would that be like a work session?
Could be.
Okay.
Could be. And that's kind of the funny thing about city politics is people have so little understanding of how they work that, it's a council meeting, it's a committee meeting, nobody knows what anything is because it never gets covered. And so when something does happen, I mean, it's normally in a city council meeting proper, because those are videotaped. Mm-hmm. But if there's not videotaped, what am I like? I'm still watching Rocky IV, apparently. They are recorded, usually digitally now that we are in the 2000-somethings.
Yeah, they could have been digitally or taped 40 years ago with a tape player, but they weren't.
But
okay, this seems like a committee, not a council
right.
meeting.
Otherwise, it would have been recorded, I assume, and there wouldn't need to be an investigation. It would be like press play. Yeah, happened.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that it probably is like a work session, or could be something. They could have been at an advisory committee or something like that, both attending something like that. But this is what they said happened. That Josh Hagen, is a council member who favors using funds for a swimming pool to build a splash pad instead, tells the Herald that his colleague Kurt Howe threatened to take him outside.
Here's my question. I mean, Are there not enough lakes up there to swim in? Or, I mean, how many people are in Thief River Falls?
I can find out really quickly.
Yeah, you find out.
It's not a huge town.
So what do they need a pool for?
Well, there's a lot of small towns around there, I suppose. 8,796. So it's a little bigger.
It's a decent sized town, but you must have money to burn up there.
Well, that may be, and I'm trying to think what else is directly around Thief River Falls. I mean, still at 8,000, that's pretty big. There's not anything super big around there. Trying to think what the next biggest town is. They're not that far from Grand Forks and Crookston.
I think Crookston's maybe half that size.
Yeah, Grand Forks is a little bigger, but they probably have their own pool in Grand Forks. It's a college town.
And then East Grand Forks right next to it.
Yep.
But still, I mean, just to think of all the things to get in a tussle about, a pool and a splash pad would not be, high on my list. I mean,
no.
Personally, I think both of them are. Why don't you just take a hose in somebody's yard and just, I just, think about, you and I have talked about how, you're from northern Minnesota and I want to move there and retire there. The one thing I don't know that I can handle is 2 months less of, nice weather.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much this pool is going to be open or not. I mean, interesting thing to get in a tussle about. I love all the comments here on the NPR story about everybody's confirming something, but they're not giving any details.
Right. It's funny. I mean, they've got the story here, more or less.
And it doesn't, just because something's under investigation doesn't mean you can't go and talk about what happened. How many times do we watch Larry King and listen to him speculate with people about what was going on in a case? I mean, nobody's suing anybody. There's no legal things going on. So how in the world is it that, these people can't talk about it? You say, hey, look, a chair was thrown at a guy. That's what I told the police. Why can't you say it publicly?
Right. I don't know. But I guess later on, that wasn't the end of it. The argument had cooled down, but later in the meeting, Hagen made a comment to somebody else. But Jerry Brown, who is the chair of
Moonbeam?
the committee.
That Moonbeam?
Yeah.
Well, you got Moonbeam in Minnesota?
This guy is the chair of the committee of the meeting. He said he was sick of Hagen's mouth, according to Hagen. And when Hagen said, I don't care, Brown threatened to take Hagen outside to teach him a lesson. Then Brown got up from his chair and walked to Hagen, according to Hagen, who stood up as a reaction. Brown pushed Hagen, and Hagen returned the push, causing Brown to fall to the ground. That sounds like a Dr. Seuss book.
Yeah, Brown is down.
Brown is down. Brown is up. Where is Pup?
Yeah. Just looking for your green eggs and ham.
Oh, the important thing is that I did not move after that, Hagen said. I stayed right at my chair. Jerry Brown fell back away from me. I did not go after him. When Jerry Brown gets up, he picks up a chair and he goes to throw it at me. Hagen said he put his hands up to get the chair away from Brown. He eventually hit Brown again, forcing him to the ground. So, yeah, this is
sounds like the story of Vern Gagne going at Hulk Hogan and Hulk Hogan beating the hell out of him.
Yeah, well, Vern was a little older by then.
Sure, Vern deserved it.
Well, he could have.
But, yeah, I'll tell you, all the contretemps we watched in Crystal all over the years, I don't know that anything comes close to tossing a chair at somebody and giving them the elbow off the top rope or whatever was going on at this council meeting.
Yeah, I guess I've never seen a fight break out. I've heard of lots of arguments breaking out.
Passionate debate is one thing.
Yeah, and I've heard about people getting escorted out. Usually not council people. Usually people that have come to talk about something getting escorted out by a bailiff or something like that.
Courtrooms, it happens quite a bit too if there's an outburst.
Right, but even at city council meetings, I've heard of that. I have heard of in a few small cases where people sitting on a city council have been escorted out by the police chief or whoever is playing bailiff in that. I know that there had been some troubles down in Victoria. I know that there, there have been a few places even around, like Victoria here in the cities where that has happened. But I don't know. What do you do in a situation like that? You hope it never comes to that, but and we've always said this though. I mean, these people walk around, I don't want to say with a certain air of power, but sometimes when you challenge that, this side of them tends to come out a little bit. They don't like that challenged as much. I
think that's true, and I think that sometimes when a old council is confronted with new council people, when residents organize against established power, you could even use something like just the reaction to somebody like President Trump winning or something like that, and he comes in as every House of Representative member and senator are all jealous of him and think that they should be there instead of him. I mean, it can lead to some of the rhetoric, at least, and occasionally into contretemps. I mean, heck, if this were the Wild West, they'd go fight a duel.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, it's Hamilton and Burr. Go take it out front. You guys go deal with it out there. So,
I don't know. I don't know how this went down. This is all strange. Over in the Grand Forks Herald article, it also says that Hagen was elected to the city council in 2014, and he says he has to use a cane to walk around because he suffers from complex regional pain syndrome. Now, I don't want to make light of that, but I wonder if that has anything to do with the Arrowhead Regional Development Organization up there.
It could. I'm sure he's on 2,000 different medications, and I'm sure none of them are working.
Yeah. Not funny. All right. I don't know. Fights coming to a city council near you? Maybe. There's no easy way out.
Possibly. I mean, wish somebody threw a chair at me. I wouldn't have stood there. That's just me. Jay, can I bring up one more thing before we get into our topic of the day?
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I had written an article on our blog about Laura Libby, who used to serve on the city council in Crystal.
Yes.
Who I knew, and even though we disagreed on a lot of things, I got along with her fine personally. But she went through this stretch in Crystal where she was constantly missing meetings and missing work sessions. And I kind of raised the specter of what is acceptable absences. I mean, you're being paid to do something. I mean, I think there was a stretch where she missed. I could go look it up. I probably shouldn't paraphrase it, but it was something like I took like a 6-month stretch or something where she missed at least a third of work sessions and council meetings. I mean, you think about it. If you missed a third of your job at work, or you missed, you think about it out there.
Yeah, you
wouldn't be employed very long. I mean, you just wouldn't be, even if the excuses were legitimate. It could be just look, this person's too much drama. This person's whatever, and absences continue to be a problem, I think, generally speaking. And I'm gonna go to Minneapolis here, where this flake, Alondra Cano, who's just I'm not sure I've seen a council person get made fun of more than this lady, but it's for totally legitimate reasons. Listen to this. Okay. This is once again from NPR, which I don't quote too much. And I'm going to quote the Star Tribune, I'm sorry. That she missed 8 of 11. This article is from July 10th, 2018. So this is not any long time ago. I'm not picking up something out of the past here. She missed 8 of 11 council, committee, or full committee council meetings. I'm sorry. Council, committee, or full council meetings. I'm not sure what council committees are in Minneapolis. Doesn't matter. She claims that is one-sided. Well, Ms. Cano, you either missed it or you didn't. I mean, I don't know how that could be one-sided. You know, it's like Dr. Phil says, this is not an essay question. You know, I mean, you either missed them or you didn't. But she says that's one-sided because it doesn't take into account the other meetings she attends, like those in the community. Well, Ms. Cano, you're being paid to go to a council meeting.
Right.
You're not being paid to go talk to the people who voted for you. You do that on your own time.
Mm-hmm.
About 8 people at that meeting, but still, what difference does that make? I mean, Cano is the chair of the Public Safety Committee and hasn't been present as the committee has grappled with high-profile issues over the past few months. It goes on to talk about there's a public safety controversies, marijuana stings, the whole racial stuff that, and apparently she's the chair of it. She's not showing up to these meetings.
My word.
According to her, she was, quote, present and engaged via email and text messages. Well, that is very misleading because you're supposed to be facing the citizens. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to be available for questions.
Yep.
Your comments are supposed to be on the record.
Yes.
Not via text or, email.
Oh, boy.
The Star Tribune has, since the start of her new term in January, has reports that she has missed 29% of the meetings she was supposed to attend. Now, folks, if you miss 29% of work, how many of you do you think you'd still be employed? But it brings me not very many, really. You think so?
That's the beautiful part about being a Democrat in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's the only beautiful part.
We say things like, "Oh, you could be, as long as you put a D next to your name, you can get elected." But let me bring you back a couple of years here, Andrew, if I can.
So this isn't a new issue.
No, in fact, we're going for the trifecta. You had the Star Tribune and NPR. I'm going to go to the city pages.
What? These are not sources we typically look up.
No, but hey, they're telling the story.
Got to listen.
Yep. This goes back to 2016, her last term before she got reelected and started this term.
What a jewel this lady is.
This is from one of her fellow council members. She is always late to meetings. Sometimes she doesn't show up at all, says a council member.
Or maybe she takes public transit.
On the condition of anonymity to maintain their working relationship. When she does, she hasn't done her homework and has to wing it. That's what she was trying to do in this article because she didn't have she wasn't prepared with the stuff she needed to present an amendment to something.
And I bet she voted on everything.
Oh, I'm sure that she did.
Collected that whole paycheck. It's funny how these socialists sit there and talk about everybody should be entitled to something, given something. Well, here you are elected to do something for your citizens. You're not there.
Yeah, well, I wonder where she was. Like maybe this other City Pages article from 2015 that says Council Member Alondra Cano's fab European trips on taxpayers' dime.
Oh, wow. So she was off in Paris?
Yeah.
Les Français? Was she at Les Français? Why didn't they just keep her?
I don't know if you sing or speak French worse. I don't know.
It's a tough choice.
It is. No. You're doing fine.
I haven't sang yet in this episode, Jay. I wasn't going to. Don't tempt me.
Okay.
I did do my Dr. Phil.
You did. It was fine. It was a fine impersonation.
Was it really?
Yes. It was
I know BS when I hear it, but
it was no. You do a good job with that.
I'm getting better at Phil.
Yeah.
It's like it's like how I over the years I got better at doing Obama.
Yeah.
Because the key to doing Obama is to talk really slow, like pretend you're talking to a 4-year-old, and then end really quickly. We've got some things we've got to do. about healthcare. And we got to get them done quick. And that's his talk.
That's a good cadence.
Yeah, it's okay. But that's, I figure if I can't, Dana Carvey once said, if I don't sound like the guy, but I get the mannerisms down, I get the laughs anyway.
Well, yeah. He was a guy that did pretty good at sounding like the guy. He's
pretty good. Dana Carvey, the best one was Paul McCartney. I've never heard a better Paul McCartney.
That is good.
Than Dana Carvey.
Oh, so
anyhow.
Yeah. Anyway, that's Alondra Cano. Although, she must not be showing up much. I mean, both of these articles, they were about a year apart, 2015, 2016. They could apparently only find one picture of her, so she must not be showing up a whole lot.
Well, maybe it's kind of like having one kid. Your parents looked at you and decided not to have another. Okay, it could be the same thing here. They saw one, we don't need any more.
We don't need any more pictures of her. All right.
Oh, that's terrible. I can't believe you said that, Jay.
Is that how it went down? All right. So if any of you in Minneapolis do happen to see her,
well, you won't see her at a council meeting. You have a better chance to see her, riding the bus or something than you do at a council meeting.
Maybe you should book a ticket over to Luxembourg or something. Maybe
or show up to the council meeting an hour late. Then maybe you'll see her.
All right. The main topic of today is,
and it's riveting. It's riveting.
Boy.
I got to say something before this.
Yes.
One thing about city government that some people I find it interesting, but some people don't, and that is the minutia.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain. We've already said that these aren't sexy jobs. They aren't sexy elections. Mm-hmm. We might be sexy guys, but we don't talk about the sexiest things. Okay, so today's. I don't want to down everybody, but today's one of those shows. It's one of those shows where we've got a lot of info, a lot of facts. I got some stories to tell about. But if you are going to run for something like city council, folks, what we're going to talk about. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about comprehensive plans, but we always talk in the past about how we're going to get more specific, deal with something on a future show.
Yeah,
this is one of those shows, right?
Right, and it's kind of like we say in the musical world. There's certain rules.
I was just going to sing, but I won't.
No, there's certain rules to songwriting, and if you just go in and you don't follow those rules, what you write is going to sound like garbage. Once you understand the rules, though, you can start to break the rules, and that's when songwriting gets interesting.
The rules are made to be broken.
They are, but you have to know what they are first. So if you don't understand the minutia of government, if you don't understand how it works, why they do it the way that they do it, you come in and you just start throwing stuff together because you don't want to do what they're doing. You're going to start. You're going to give recommendations that don't make sense, and you're not going to make a lot of progress. But if you understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, then you can purposefully break the rules in a way that you're going to start to bring things around to a more common sense way to do government.
Well, and how to do it.
Yes.
I mean, how to work with your planning commission, how to work with your city planner, how to work with your, questioning them. Why do we have this rule? Why do we have this limit? Why do we have blah, blah, blah?
Right.
You might get some new thinking, and new thinking is in government is usually you think outside the box. They put you back in the box and nail it shut. Mm-hmm. But I'm telling you, you're going to have to understand what we're about to talk about.
Yes.
So what are we talking about, Jay?
We are talking about zoning.
Oh, wow. That's just riveting.
Don't before you zone out.
Before you change the channel, okay, we're gonna make this funny, fun, interesting.
It'll be good.
We always do. But zoning sounds boring.
But it's part of every comprehensive plan. And we've talked about comprehensive plans, but we haven't talked specifically about zoning, what it is, and why it's important to how a city is developed.
Well, and also how to read a city map. I mean, you look in a comprehensive plan and you look at a picture of city A, I mean, pick your city, and you're going to see a key with a bunch of colors and a bunch of, words that maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't heard of.
Right.
What's a floodplain? What's see commercial. Why is this commercial district different than this one? What makes this housing different from this one?
Right.
You have unplanned areas, you have industrial areas, you maybe have aviation, and then you have what's called a future land use map, where they will show in their 10-year plan, or their plan they update every 10 years, I should say, what the city might look like. And I'm using air quotes because a good council will use that as a guide. A bad council will use that as a Bible.
Yes.
And there's a big, big difference between the two. So you can see into the future. I mean, and cities are implementing this stuff. I mean, you see, why are they putting this here? Well, you look in their comprehensive plan that they wrote 10 years ago, develop blah, blah, blah. I guarantee you 99 times out of 100, it's in there.
Yeah.
So, you got, not only do you need to read this to know what's coming and know how to change it, but you got to be prepared if you're going to be against something. And I'm telling you, if it's 10 years in the works, it ain't stopping at that point.
Right.
It's just not going to. The train has left, and the caboose has left, and it's not stopping anytime soon.
Right. Now, if you're in the 7-county metro area, you have to do a comprehensive plan every 10 years and submit it to the Met Council, who has to approve it. If they don't approve it, they send it back to you. You have to redo it, send it back again. If you're in greater Minnesota, however, you're not really required to do that. Now, the Minnesota Association of Development Organizations, MADO, has their own Develop Minnesota 2016 plan. With that plan, part of the impetus of it is to get your regional development organizations, of which there are 10 around Minnesota, not including the Met Council, which is a metropolitan planning organization, and there are also metropolitan planning organizations in St. Cloud and down in the Rochester area and Duluth. And we've talked about that a little bit, but maybe that's for a future show. But what happens then in these regional development organizations, or RDOs, is that part of the orders they've been handed down from MADO is to help assist cities in making these comprehensive plans. So although they might not be able to make them mandatory yet, there are a good number of Minnesota cities that already do these comprehensive plans. Your bigger ones do, and I think that it's starting to become the thing to do with the smaller cities as well.
Well, and also, in say a county with a lot of small towns or not a lot of big cities, say a county that has 50,000 people, they may have their own.
Yeah, and their RDO might have their own.
So they may not have the authority, but remember, townships don't have the same authorities that cities do.
Right.
So counties wield more power in greater Minnesota than they do maybe. Well, as far as planning goes, I mean, I think a county like Hennepin County spends a lot more, largely because of health and human services and things like that. Your counties in greater Minnesota spend a lot less on that, but I think they spend a lot more on pushing certain agenda items onto smaller government.
They do, and I think especially the townships.
Yeah.
I think they carry a brunt of that. So even if
the sheriff's office is probably who runs the law enforcement and so on and so forth. There is a lot of that. I think that the greater Minnesota is not under the pressure of the Met Council. I think they are under enough pressure, though, where I'm sure that their representatives are going to the regional government. Their planners, which I don't know how a city of a couple thousand people employs a full-time city planner. That makes very little sense to me. But my guess is the administrator might take some of that role on.
Probably.
And they're probably being sent to these conferences, and these Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities has its own toolkit on stuff like this.
Right.
So I think that it's the same, but it's different. If that makes, I don't want to call it separate but equal. I'll call it, because that has a bad ring to it. I'll call it the same but different. But yes, I mean, the zoning, and the cities have a lot of leeway when it comes to zoning. That is in state law. That cities pretty much wield a lot of power when it comes to zoning.
Mm-hmm.
And what a city does is they look at the map of the entire city.
Right.
And they basically decide, if you will, because remember, the city hands out building permits, they hand out business licenses, they hand out conditional use permits.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's all done at a city level. That's not done at a state level. It's done at a city level. So you'll look at a map, and it will show all of the areas of housing in one color.
Right.
And then that will be broken down into low, medium, and high.
Mm-hmm.
I've also seen it, rarely, but I've seen it broken down into like senior housing even getting its own area, or disabled, or like hospice care having its own zone, so to speak. That's rare. I know New Hope breaks it down a lot like that. I think they have 5 classifications there. And what you will see commercial, but that may be broken down too.
Right.
A shopping mall might be classified differently than a strip mall might be.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see if you have industrial property, which is heavy in some cities and light in others. Agricultural, which in cities is not as prominent in the 7-county metro, because even in the 7-county metro, almost all that's been developed now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can go out to Suburban County, Wright County, and see something different. Kennebec County, Isanti County,
right,
and you'll see differences there. Aviation will have its own zone, and inside these zones are rules.
Mm-hmm.
That the cities have come up with. And of course, surprise, surprise, it's not like they're all different. It's kind of been...
Oh, of course not.
Yeah, it's been handed down. Every city kind of does something similar. We all know where they get their blueprint for that. League of Minnesota Cities has got their own...
Right.
Their own bathtub of things to do there. And you're going to see differences. So you're going to see differences, but again, you're going to see things very, very similar.
Yes.
Not major differences, but some.
Mm-hmm.
Varying city to city.
Yeah, and like we say, there are a lot of similarities, because you have like the League of Minnesota Cities and the Met Council that both kind of lay that out there.
Especially the future land use is really pushed
right
by the governments above. But for example, let's just jump into this.
Okay.
For example, we'll start with housing. Mm-hmm. For example, every city has their definition of, I'll just use the 3 big ones: low, medium, and high. Again, you may find something different, you may not. Lowdown, what they'll do is they'll usually use, quote, units per acre.
Yes.
And of course, nobody knows what an acre is, but that's still how they will say it.
Mm-hmm.
They might call low density mostly single-family homes. Some of them will specify that, some of them won't. But typically, they will have a range, up to 7 units an acre, something like that.
Right.
5 units an acre, some sort of window. Then they'll have a window that's medium density. That may be 8 to 14. I don't know. Somewhere. Medium density typically is actually probably the least of the 3. Medium density typically is like a group of townhomes that are attached.
Mm-hmm.
Would probably be classified as that. I even think some areas like in New Hope, like Winnetka Green, I think that might be classified as medium. I think they can get away with that because you're not growing vertically. Again, it's all about units per acre. You can have a big swamp in the middle. You have something like that. I think they get away with that in some cities. And then high density is mostly apartment buildings, assisted living, things that are usually multi-storied, and things like that. Mixed use usually can have its own designation, because that is commercial and residential. You prior to 10 years ago, you never saw anything like that outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul, but that certainly has changed since then.
Right. Well, and if you're in the metro area, the Metropolitan Council has density minimums depending on your community designation. So if you're in like an urban center, say Minneapolis, our favorite places of St. Louis Park, if you're in St. Paul, West St. Paul, that's all urban center. Then once you get outside of that, it's urban, suburban edge, or emerging suburban edge, rural center, diversified rural residential, or agricultural. And there then for each of those, there are minimums for density. Minimums from a group that probably doesn't know where your city is on a map.
Probably not. A lot of them probably don't.
Maybe that's right.
So what are their minimums? Do they have them listed there? What are the minimums?
Well,
so the same minimums in Minneapolis or the same minimums in
St. Paul?
Independence?
No, because you have a different designation. So it all depends on your community designation. Center. Yeah, exactly. So Minneapolis obviously is going to have a higher minimum than a place like Independence, which is going to be kind of on that suburban edge, maybe even. I need to go back to the map. I was trying to scroll through to find. It's a 22-page document, of course, because nothing can ever be said in one page by the Met Council. A place like Independence actually is. Where are we? Out there. I mean, it's looking like agricultural out that way for the most part. Maybe a little bit. It's not listing Independence on this map per se, but knowing where it is, it's kind of rural residential / agricultural / diversified rural. Yeah.
Well, that's right on the Met Council's border, if you want, anyhow.
Right, exactly. But if this is something that our listeners are interested in looking at, I mean, it's under the metrocouncil.org website, and then planning, publications, and resources. Thrive MSP 2040 plan. It's all in there. So but in this document per se, they're not. But, of course, they're given their projections. Like as of May 2014, the council forecasts that the suburban edge area will add 181,000 residents, 79,000 households, and 92,000 jobs between 2010 and 2040.
Oh, give me a break.
This represents a growth of 42% in population, 49% in households, and 52% in employment over the 3 decades. Now, this is important, though, because this is what they use to determine the zoning that your city needs to put in its comprehensive plan.
Right. That's what they're going to do, your future land use and all that. I mean, I remember when I was on the Planning Commission in Crystal, and they were projecting Crystal would grow something like 50% in population between the time I was serving, which was 2013-14, and the year 2040.
Yes.
And that was so ridiculous. But they were projecting, and everybody at Crystal just rejected it. Everybody, even the council members we didn't get along with. The city staff laughed at it. It was absurd. But the Met Council doesn't quite have the power to turn that into a mandate.
Right.
So there's a little bit of wiggle room there. And I know in New Hope, there was a housing project over by Medicine Lake where they actually used these projections to justify putting in a high-density place, even though it was totally laughable.
Right.
New Hope's population hasn't moved in 50 years. Mm-hmm. It was a total joke. So it's these numbers, you're right, they do get used, and they are an influence on changing zoning laws as far as units per acre or dwellings or whatever they call it. I mean, it's irrelevant. It's all kind of the same thing. But again, what we're seeing is the decline or redefining. We talked in a previous show about how The definition of making it was having your own house and your own car. We talked about this in the War on Cars episode. And I mean, it's the same sort of thing here. This is, again, it's an abstract way to attack what was the American dream. Now they want the American dream to live in high density, over transit, never go more than 2 miles in your entire life, and have no freedom, no independence. So again, the R1, R2, R3, because cities are in control of building permits, control of rental licenses, control of all of those things, what they designate is important for current use and future use. It also may be a place where the EDA looks at, especially with housing, TIF financing.
Yep.
Because if they've got something designated for R3 in the future, they're going to, quote, make it happen.
Yes.
And how do they do that? They do it by manipulating money. So you're going to see. We're seeing it right now in New Hope over by the golf course. It was designated there for high-density housing. What are they putting up? They are using a TIF district, creating that. They are manipulating the market. It's crony capitalism, and they are putting in luxury apartments.
They're all over the place.
Luxury? Anybody driven by there recently?
Anybody ever lived in an apartment?
Well, I mean,
I don't know.
It's funny listening to them talk about affordable housing one minute and subsidized luxury condos or something the next.
Yeah.
Total disgrace. Ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I understand having housing choices, but they force it, and they try to throw it all into one area, so there's housing choices all within one neighborhood, and anybody can live anywhere instead of and this is part of zoning as well, is that we're seeing a blurring of the edges when it comes to combining the different types of zoning that traditionally. Why don't we talk about that a little bit? Traditionally, how are neighborhoods set up?
Well, and let me make one more point before we do that, because I know I'll forget it.
Yeah.
And that is also it makes no neighborhood, no city has an identity anymore.
Right.
If you want to live next to transit and take the bus, go move to Minneapolis. Nobody moves out to Maple Grove to take the bus. Hell, it just doesn't exist.
Right.
But I mean, traditionally, zoning for housing has been very, very simple.
Yes.
You've got your single family homes, you've got your apartments and your
right, and those are traditionally like on the edge. Like if your R1 is single family homes, your R2 maybe would be smaller apartments, fourplexes, things like townhomes. They would kind of be on the edge of that R1 or on the edge of like commercial.
Yes, they would not be planted in the middle of a R1.
Like Minneapolis is trying to get past right now.
Or I would even add something like 47th and Adair in Crystal, where all those townhomes, I'm not sure how they classified it, I'm pretty sure it's R2, but are supplanted in the middle of the Little League field and the cemetery, and then a bunch of 1960s ramblers and around it. I mean, you see that
right
where it totally looks out of place. I mean, you see that too. So you are seeing that more, and you are seeing, and also the things with like apartments and things like that. Often you would see them by shopping malls, places that are very busy, next to restaurants and things like that. But you're not seeing that so much anymore either. You're seeing things get kind of dropped in the middle of why in the hell is that there?
Yeah,
I mean, it is weird. It's almost like your neighborhood is losing an identity. You don't have that neighborhood feel anymore.
Right.
So, yeah, brutal.
Yeah, so, I mean, traditionally, you wouldn't have those things. Sometimes the edges of communities would be a little bit, where you could maybe have R1, and on the very edge of it, it's starting to bleed into like a commercial type thing, but you usually wouldn't put it next to industrial or something like that.
And I would also add things like you look at a place like Crystal.
Yeah.
Today, I don't think R1 can be built that close to an airport. I think that
Right.
There was a 1983 law passed that at the state level, Crystal was grandfathered in, and as were a few other cities with reliever airports around the metro. I know Apple Valley is one too, and so is Blaine, where R1 can't be that close to an airport. It's got to be further away.
Yeah.
So, there has to be a buffer, whether it's commercial property or green space or whatever, industrial, there's got to be something. And I tell you what, too, I mean, you probably won't see it along railroad tracks the way you have it in Crystal now, too.
Right.
I mean, they're very close to homes and backyards.
Well, in Plymouth, yeah, they run right through backyards there, just south of Bass Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing in Crystal and New Hope. And I don't think that would happen today either.
No, probably not. But it's weird, though, because now they're starting to blur those together, and you'll find R1 and R2 and R3 all kind of jumbled together, and you'll put them really close to commercial centers so that people can walk instead of having to drive. Industrial still is a little bit separated because that's a different deal, and you're having semi-trucks, you're having, possibly front-end loaders, that kind of traffic going back and forth. But, the rest of it is all kind of being put together in these little cloisters where they expect people to do business and work and live all in the same area.
Yeah, and that's the idea behind mixed use.
Right.
That's the whole point of it is you live above places of business. What if it gets a little noisy, I mean,
Yeah.
and also I should say mixed uses have a lot of special rules about when you can and can't be open for a business. There's noise ordinances can really be enforced both on the business end and on the living end. So, your freedom is restricted quite a bit in mixed use.
Right. And I think, though, in zoning, we're also finding where different types of designations are being given to different types of commercial endeavors as well. And we talked about this a couple of podcasts ago. We're like down in Eden Prairie, they tried to lump in the adult use businesses with the pawn shops and the firearms retailers all together in one lump, where they wanted to put a moratorium on that so that they could study the zoning laws to figure out if they can restrict where these types of businesses will open up in the future. Now, there are different types of uses, and sometimes that's when we're talking about zoning, like the use of things, they'll use these rules to restrict certain businesses from doing things, whether that is selling firearms or selling gold as in a pawn shop or allowing outside entertainment or dining. Why don't you talk a little bit about how that works in your time on the planning commission with that?
I'm going to say one thing. Some of those laws aren't altogether bad.
Right, exactly. You don't want a rock band playing outside at 10 at night,
right? But
when you
there's
live close.
True, but there's noise ordinances in a city that would, generally speaking, cover that.
Right.
You don't need to make a special law for certain kinds of property.
Although it depends, because like in Crystal, and I don't know that they've changed it, but I know that it was a very vague and bad noise ordinance that they had there, the past, where if it's clearly audible beyond 50 feet, you're breaking the law. No time frame, no nothing. Any time of day, if it's clearly audible outside of 50 feet, you're breaking the law.
On private property?
That would probably be private property.
So that's blaring my radio in the garage.
Right. So, But I don't know how that blurs over when you have commercial meeting residential now.
Okay. Couple things. I mean, if you have a city like Crystal, I'll just give you a couple examples, and I'll come back to your question.
Yeah.
They have different designations of commercial. You may see this differently. Business zoning is sometimes how it's called. Commercial is how, generally speaking, it's kind of defined. for example, like the shopping center on Bass Lake Road and West Broadway is actually zoned differently than, say, like the one I remember dealing with a lot was on 36th and Douglas,
right,
where Milton's is, and then there's
a fish store and a
workout place, and then across the street
tattoo
there's a liquor
shop.
store, a barber shop, and then I think Pizza Hut is on
the northeast corner.
Kitty corner there. It's residential on the northwest side.
Yes.
They're really strange. In older cities, you see, Robbinsdale has this too, where they have these four little, they have a gas station and something else, and it's residential right behind it.
And that's the way it used to be done. I mean, if you look at Minneapolis, they have a lot of these areas where you'll find a lot of little delis and restaurants and little convenience shops,
small businesses
throughout neighborhoods. Yeah,
right. It's called neighborhood commercial. It's kind of an old designation that we don't. Newer cities, you're not going to find that.
Right.
You're going to find your downtown area. You drive into Big Lake, you find one street that has every bar, gas station, and whatever, and the rest of it, that's just how newer cities, for whatever reason, are built, right along Highway 10 there. Neighborhood commercial has, I don't want to call it more restrictions. It's because I get it on the one hand. On the other hand, it's hard to put every business pound it into a square, a round peg into a square hole.
Right.
And I had two specific issues that I remember dealing with. One was the workout center there, Body Works. I can't remember what it's called, but
that might be right.
Yeah, they had they were open neighborhood commercial in Crystal, and I don't know I'm sure this varies a little bit city to city. Had a zoning law they could only operate from, I want to say 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. I think that was all they could be open. Now, the exercise place came to the Planning Commission and said, well, we have a lot of people like to exercise, work out before they go to the office in the morning.
Yeah.
They can't work out. If I got to work at 7 a.m., I can't go work out at 5:30. So they applied for what's called a conditional use. I actually pushed for a change to be made because the other businesses there were not going to open up at 5 a.m.
Right.
So there was no reason that you couldn't just make it, because the conditional use permit's not cheap. I mean, you have to pay for it.
Of course you do.
And you have to pay for it whether it gets approved or not. It's an application.
Wow. So
we ended up approving it. I think we did it 5:30 or 6 o'clock for them. Maybe it was 5:30. I might not have the times 100%. This is 5 years ago, but we did approve it. The council did approve it, which was the older council. Jim was the mayor, but it was before the 2014 revolution or wave or whatever you want to call it in Crystal. But so that was one issue. Also, Milton's wanted outdoor seating, which was not allowed in C2. It was allowed in C1. I'm sorry, it was not allowed in C1. It was allowed in C2.
Okay.
That's why you have outdoor at Louis, you have it at Buffalo Wild Wings, you have it at El Loro's. And we had to prove a conditional use, two of them. Yeah. One for them to stay open later. I think the hours were different on Friday and Saturday.
Right.
And then one just for them to have outdoor seating, period. So it was kind of a double whammy. But those are some of the, and again, I mean, those are some of the little issues that will definitely come up. You'll deal with things like this if you're on a city council.
Right.
And if you serve on a planning commission where, so many people, we always recommend you do this to get a stepping stone into running for city council. So those zoning things, I remember LED signs came in. I mean, Crystal had a law outlawing them. That you couldn't use an LED sign, and we changed that. There were some dissenting votes, and they had some decent arguments. I voted for it just because LED is where we're at. I mean, you're not going to hold technology back. We can whine and cry about it, but same people who complain about that are glued to their phone all day. Right. So, and watching their satellite at home. So, I mean, or watching their FlixNet. But, Netflix. So, that was another thing we implemented was there was a liquor store or something that wanted, we found New Hope outlawed it, but wasn't enforcing it. It was really goofy.
Right.
But our commercial actually said no to it. Then you wouldn't believe the restrictions on. So, I changed a lot with the task force. That we removed a lot of those.
That's good.
Yeah. So, but they had height and width and how often a message can flash and all of those things were part of zoning laws there.
Wow. Yeah, and those are called uses. I mean, the idea is, if you can do it, it's called a permitted use. If you can't do it, it's a prohibited use. If you can't do it and it's a prohibited use, but you get permission to do it in a certain instance, that's a conditional use. Yep. And if you get to do it for a short amount of time, that's an interim use.
Yes. In fact, a lot of these things are done on a conditional use permits are done on a probationary basis. I mean, it's and again, I do have to credit Crystal as well as John Sutter, our old city planner, because he went along with, in fact, he recommended when I was on the planning commission, we removed a lot of commercial areas had restrictions on, how big like a square footage you could have and things like that. And that, of course, limits what kind of business can go in somewhere.
Right.
Which is a problem, especially then. We don't have as much vacant property as we do now, but then you remember when the Crystal Shopping Center was, or not the shopping center, but the gallery was half empty, and there was the post office, Buffalo Wild Wings, the eye doctor, and that was like all that was in there. And now it's changed the law. The pawn shop's there, Pizza Ranch is there now. I think down in the valley still there too. But
yes, it is.
Yeah, but there was a lot of concern about are we too restrictive? And unfortunately, it took a place being half empty in a recession to have that happen. But it did eventually happen. But it is amazing how many laws are on the books with zoning. In fact, in Crystal Chapter 5, it's pretty much an entire chapter on zoning restrictions.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and that's what it's all about is the use of it. But I mean, there are other things that go into that too. I mean, zoning controls everything. Whether it's the height of things, like I know in Crystal they used to not be able to have a garage that was taller than the house. That was, I know, a zoning rule that was in there. Setbacks are something you will always find as part of your zoning requirements.
Not only that, but what part the city can stick their hands on.
Right, the right of way.
Yes, I mean that has. I've seen that anywhere from 5 to 15 feet in various cities as far as what they can have control over on your property. Of course, you're paying taxes on what they think they can control.
But these setbacks can get tricky.
There's a lot of gray area there.
There's a lot of gray area because the city will tell you have to be set back, your house has to be set back a certain amount from the street. But also, if you're on a lake, in the backyard, the DNR is going to tell you you have to be set back from the lake a certain amount.
Absolutely.
So you have those two entities kind of fighting over where you can put your house.
I think the DNR, the state law, is the state law. I think the city can come in and make it more restrictive.
Right.
It's kind of one of those things like the state sets the minimum wage, but that's a minimum. The city can come in and up that minimum, but they can't lower it. So I think you have that too. And then there's floodplain laws. Like one of the reasons in Crystal the Public Works building moved was that the floodplain laws came in and changed, and the state actually made a law that they couldn't rebuild on that site.
Right.
So even if they wanted to, they couldn't do it. And in a fully developed city, you're limited as to where you can go. So it's one of the reasons they went where they did, because they couldn't rebuild that building. So, again, you're right. State laws come in and they change, and older cities have a tough time conforming with some of those laws, that are in place. And, there is gray. Easements are another thing. You'll see that in more areas, cities that are not as fully developed, where an easement can come in like that.
Right.
For future transit use is something that you're constantly seeing now, where areas are being kind of designated for things that 20 years ago they'd have never been designated for.
Right.
But it's, the Northern Lights might go through here, so we'll put something in that makes, like you said, blurs the lines of R1, R2, R3 mixed use, and so on and so forth. And then a whole new set of rules come with that.
Right.
Because transit is not city property. So, whole new set of standards come in. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, you're going to look at these maps, and it looks simple, but I'm telling you, there's a million things under each of these.
Yeah, and like we said at the beginning, though, or beginning of this segment, all zoning laws aren't bad. I mean, you go to a place like Texas where they don't have those zoning laws. I remember reading a story a few years ago about a group, I assume, that bought a parcel of land, and they were building an amusement park right next to some residential neighborhood. And there was, this big to-do about that. You've got to have, I think, some sort of order for the sake of the residents. And I don't say that because I want draconian zoning laws, but to preserve liberty, you have to be able to preserve people's property. Yeah. And if you build I
built a twin stadium in the middle of Crystal, I'm completely changing the entire city.
Right. Likewise, if you decided you wanted to buy 3 lots in a residential neighborhood and turn it into a pig farm, that would stink to high heaven, and you have to be zoned for agricultural to do that.
And there are minimums, I think, acreages to where that could. I don't think that scenario could fly anywhere.
Right. But Texas maybe.
Couldn't in Minnesota. But I think that. There still is that issue of how close, especially in greater Minnesota, how close to a cornfield should you build housing. Yeah, it's weird because I remember when my grandmother was in assisted living out in Glencoe, Minnesota, which is south of Hutchinson there. Her facility was right on the edge of town. Right on some farm, like you look out the window and you see cows, and it was very weird. But it's weird to go from agricultural to a high density assisted living facility. And of course, obviously, you're in a small town, not in a city, because it's a little different. But
right,
yeah, all laws are not bad. I mean. We can't fall down that just like all taxation is not theft. I'm sorry, but government has constitutional duties.
Right.
I can't quite take it that far. At the same time, private property rights of everybody have to be respected.
Yeah.
Residents, business, public safety has to be taken into account. People often pick a neighborhood or a house for, how quiet it is, or you don't want things too close to schools, and things like that too. Right. So I think that the city has an obligation to take all that into account when making a decision. At the same time, I think cities have taken it too far the other way and have decided that only something is going to go there, and if something isn't going there by means of capitalism, we're going to make it happen by other means.
Right.
And so I think, again, the pendulum has swung too far that way.
Yeah.
So, a healthy balance between liberty and tyranny, is always appropriate. But again, if you're going to be a business and you've got houses right behind you, I think some reasonable limitations on that is fair.
Right.
I think it can get unreasonable.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think I think that has to be respected. And I'm one. I grew up 2 blocks from Bass Lake Road and 2 blocks from Thriftway and a block from the railroad tracks in Crystal. I mean, but at the same time, it was still kind of a quiet neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a nice balance there. Now, if you lived a few blocks from me, you might not have agreed with that. But, but I think that, those businesses were open 24/7. Nobody was cutting through our street. So, And that's another thing about when you talk about the war on cars. I mean, how often do you see people using cut-throughs now?
Mm-hmm.
People trying to get around traffic, parking maybe where they shouldn't be.
Right.
It's one thing for a resident to park out in front of their street, or their house, because those are streets that they pay for.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's all sorts of things that go into this. And so, when you talk about zoning, I mean, you guys out there who want to run for this stuff, you got to be you got to know everything about it to make a good informed decision. You got to listen.
And you got to find out how those policies are made in your city. I mean, it really depends on the type of city you have, too. Yeah. I mean, a home rule charter city can make their own. And then you've got your statutory cities. And before we were kind of at the beginning of this as well, we were talking about how are they made? How are these decisions made out in greater Minnesota? And really, I mean, the answer is it can be as varied as anything. I mean, just looking at
the answer is they copy somebody else.
Well, yeah, but there's no fast and sure way to do it.
Yeah, that's true.
I looked at,
but again, remember, we don't want everything to be the same.
Exactly.
That's
so
okay.
I think this is good.
Yeah.
I looked at 3 cities, all with a population of about 3,000 people. Looked at our favorite, Roseau, Minnesota, that we keep going back to their wonderful comprehensive plan.
Good hockey team, but
they've got a fantastic hockey team. Their comprehensive plan sucks.
Yes.
But you look at their city staff, they have 2 in the administration, finance, and community development department. They have a city clerk and treasurer, which then I'm just, by looking at this, I assume that they are what is called a statutory A city, which most cities are in Minnesota, which means they're appointing, not electing, a city clerk and a treasurer.
Right.
So this person, Elizabeth Carlson, is the city clerk and treasurer. They can combine those.
Yes.
That's in the Minnesota statute.
Yes, they have to have a record keeper.
Yep. And then Todd Peterson, who is the community development coordinator. So he is full-time staff, gets paid. That's what he does.
He probably does community development and planning in one job.
Probably, yep. Then you go to a place like my hometown, Proctor, Minnesota, also about 3,000 people. They do not have anybody that is like a planner, a community development person. It might fall on the city administrator. They have an administrator, so they might be... I don't know this. They might be a statutory B, but although statutory A under certain circumstances can also bring an administrator in, as with bigger cities, we've seen them do that. But yeah, they don't have anybody that does like zoning or community development at all. So where does that fall? Probably under the city administrator. It certainly doesn't. The other people they have are like finance and accounting, confidential secretary, network administrator, and then event and marketing coordinator. So and they have a public works department, a public utilities department, but under administration they don't have anybody that does that. So I would guess it's the administrator. And then if we go over to like Paynesville, Minnesota, also about 3,000 people, they have somebody on staff that is an administrative assistant / zoning specialist. And that's how they handle it. So every city outside of the metro, I'm gonna say that in the metro, most cities do this the same. And we found it to be pretty consistent how they do that, whether it's statutory A or B. But once you get out into greater Minnesota and you're looking at your standard plan cities, your statutory A cities, your statutory B cities, and even your home rule charter cities, you're going to find some variance, especially in smaller towns, how that is put together. And you're going to have to figure that out for yourself.
Interesting. Yeah, and I would say in the cities... a city planner, community development person, they may come up with a different name for that, but they are the 2 people who are the point people. Some cities will have building inspectors who enforce a lot of the zoning laws and things like that, especially cities that are 40, 50, 60,000 people. I mean, I pretty much guarantee you they'll have something like that. Code enforcement, code inspector, something like that. They're we'll have a person just dedicated 24/7 to doing stuff like this.
Right.
With the planning commission, a city planner is probably who you would work with if you are on a planning commission. Was John Sutter in Crystal. He's now moved up to the community development. That's technically the head of that department. City planner's kind of like their assistant. That's Dan Olson now in Crystal. But I mean, the point being that the structure will be very similar in the cities, and like you said, it could be very different in greater Minnesota.
Yeah.
So, and again, I mean, you may have a city that has a lot of industrial property, which is, there are some cities like that.
Yeah.
Cities that have kind of a little bit of everything. Blaine would be a good example of a city that's got an airport. They've got industry. They've got major highways going through. They've got, they certainly have medium and high density. They have old houses, new houses. Very interesting city. Kind of has a little bit of everything. I'd say Coon Rapids is a city like that as well. They don't have an airport, but I think a lot of the cities that are third, fourth, fifth ring are really going to have kind of a little bit of everything in them. So,
right.
You live in one. I mean, I just, like I say, planning commission is such a great. I think we have to make a play for that because it's such a great entree into learning about this and voting on these things, meeting people, listening to their concerns, and taking that up to a city council level is just such a great commission and so important. They're all important. Well, the environmental quality, not so much. But I mean,
human rights.
Yeah, human
we're
rights.
just kidding. If it's a problem in your city, that is an important commission. However, in most cities, it's
right. But the commissions need to change with just because one city has one doesn't mean another city should.
Right. Each city should do what it needs to do.
Right. I mean, and planning you'll find everywhere. Park board you'll find everywhere. Charter you'll find in every charter.
Yep.
So I mean, those are always commissions to get on. But the planning commission, I mean, zoning laws and again, you need some rules, but the more rules you have, the harder and harder it is to do business. And to me, the best government is the one that, as much as they can, gets out of the way and lets citizens do things naturally.
Yes.
But
so I would second that. Get on the planning commission if you can. If there's an opening, apply. Get on it. If you're planning on running for city council, I highly advise you to do that. I mean, the charter commission is another great way to go. I know people who have gone from parks and rec up into city council, but I'm telling you, the planning commission, I think, is imperative because if you're looking at an entry-level governing position, even if you don't want to be on a city council, giving recommendations to the city council on zoning regulations, I think, is huge in the defense of liberty.
Right. I mean, especially folks that, liberty is... I consider myself one where that's paramount.
Yeah.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, these are where 90% of these laws are made.
Yep.
I mean, you want to repeal stuff or vote on stuff or stop something.
Yeah.
Instead of showing up to a meeting, complaining, going home, and doing nothing for a year, getting on a planning commission is there can't be anything.
That's the way to do it.
It's totally the way to do it.
So I'll make a plug for that. But again, look at that map and look at that future map. Look at your city now, and look at where your city could be going. Yep.
And boy, that probably motivate you. If you're not motivated to run for city council or get on a planning commission, go look that up in your comprehensive plan.
Absolutely.
And we'll see what you think when that's over with.
Yep. So if you are interested in getting on a planning commission or any commission for that matter, running for city council based on something you saw, if you want to help our cause, and by our cause, I mean Minnesota's cause, not Community Solutions Minnesota's cause, but Minnesota's cause that we're spearheading. We are on the tip of the spear, 20,000 strong. That is what we're advocating, that we need 20,000 people who think like us with a mind for liberty and that want to see governing at the local level done differently. If you want to join Team 20K, then you need to get a hold of us, and you do that at commsolutionsmn@gmail.com. That's commsolutionsmn@gmail.com. Otherwise, be sharing this stuff with your friends, your neighbors, your family, and get them educated as well. And we're going to keep making these. We promise that we're going to be here for you week in, week out, and give you something fresh and new and great every week. And your part of the deal is just to go make it happen out there in Minnesota. We're doing the homework, and we're giving it to you now. Now there it is.
Only you and I can make a show about zoning interesting.
That's true.
I can't wait to listen to this. We're pretty good at this.
Well, once you get in close to that 100 podcast mark, I mean,
we're getting there. Oh,
we're
boy.
getting there. We're in the 70s.
Huh.
So
let's get in the 80s. I don't want to be in the Jimmy Carter years. Let's get in the 80s.
I like
pretty
that.
quick.
I like that. All right, folks. There it is. That is zoning in as much as we can give you in about an hour. So take that and run with it. We've done our part, and now we turn it over to you. We love you, Minnesota. Now it's your turn to get to work.